Bread, soup, were all my life. I was a body, or rather something less than a body, a hungry stomach. Only the stomach realized the elapse of time.
People who live in rich Europe find it difficult to acknowledge famine. Genuine hunger is when in another man you no longer see a human being, but something worth eating.
Around noon, the prisoners would get their lunch from such cauldrons, one bowl filled with watered-down powdered soup, with a bit of groats, turnips, or potatoes, sometimes with nettles or kale, but every sip and every bite was priceless. That was the reason for a constant fight for survival by the cauldrons. Everyone dreamed of a portion from the very bottom. The prisoners dreamed about this portion from the bottom of the cauldron because the soup was thicker at the bottom. The soup at the very top, however, was cold and watery and of virtually no value. Here is a fragment of the memoirs of the Polish prisoner Stanisław Tokuski.
Everybody knew the principle of...
That's been Mike Tyson's career. It is cool, I guess. I mean, you can tell it's definitely from the 90s. It's in decent shape. So, how much are you looking to get?
I'm looking at 2,000.
Okay, you are proud of this. I'll tell you what, this is a really...
Qual é a coisa? Qual é ela que vem com um crédito, mas nem sempre se dá por ela?
É o ISSO.
É o imposto selo pela utilização do crédito. E paga-se quando se contrata um crédito. É tão simples que se adivinha. Ensino básico. Para aprender mais, vá a cofidis.pt, onde explicamos este e outros temas financeiros.
Cofidis, de pessoas para pessoas.
Bread, soup, were all my life. I was a body, or rather something less than a body, a hungry stomach. Only the stomach realized the elapse of time.
People who live in rich Europe find it difficult to acknowledge famine. Genuine hunger is when in another man you no longer see a human being, but something worth eating.
Around noon, the prisoners would get their lunch from such cauldrons, one bowl filled with watered-down powdered soup, with a bit of groats, turnips, or potatoes, sometimes with nettles or kale, but every sip and every bite was priceless. That was the reason for a constant fight for survival by the cauldrons. Everyone dreamed of a portion from the very bottom. The prisoners dreamed about this portion from the bottom of the cauldron because the soup was thicker at the bottom. The soup at the very top, however, was cold and watery and of virtually no value. Here is a fragment of the memoirs of the Polish prisoner Stanisław Tokuski.
Everybody knew the principle of physics, that bigger pieces are heavier and will fall down onto the bottom. Everyone attempted to stand by force, elbowing their way more or less to the 15th to 20th place before a 25-liter cauldron. And within this range, one might expect a potato, or two, or even three of them.
People who had been severely affected by hunger starved for a long time. They, in fact, lost their self-preservation instinct in a quest to satisfy their hunger. That is, they stopped paying attention to other dangers The most important thing was to eat something. And these prisoners, despite being beaten by SS men or capos, were still able to find leftovers in buckets by the camp kitchen and did not pay attention to the fact that their lives were threatened at that moment by a capo's stick. For them, the most important thing was to stop feeling, even for a moment, the intense hunger they experienced at the camp. It's June 1940. This unique photo shows a group of Poles being rushed to the train station from the prison in Tarnów. They do not know yet that they will go down in history as the first transport of Polish political prisoners to KL Auschwitz. One figure stands out from the crowd of scared and battered people. He boldly looks straight ahead. He walks proudly with his head high, like a real champion. In the Auschwitz camp, he will receive the number 349. A beautiful wooden snuff box he made at the camp will save a Wehrmacht soldier's life. How is that possible? Who is this remarkable man?
Will the year 1931 go down in the history of ski jumping? The audience at the ski jump in the Italian town of Ponte di Legno has frozen and is waiting. Bronisław Czech has taken off and is flying, and here he is! We've got a world record, 79.5 meters!
Bronisław Czech came from Zakopane, from poor family. When he was 12, he won the ski competition, and the prize was his first ever own skis. On the skis he jumped and ran.
Not only in Zakopane, but also in Krynica, he proved again he was not only the best Polish ski jumper, but one of the top European jumpers.
Bronisław Czech, among the best sportsmen in the year 1928.
Bronisław Czech, the most versatile skier in the world.
"24 times he became champion of Poland in various competitions. He also was the world champion. Besides, he was a great climber and he flew on gliders. As if that wasn't enough, he had a great artistic talent. He carved in woods, painted, and played violin. And he was incredibly handsome."
Is this 8-time Olympian, 24-time Polish ski champion the same person? And if so, how did it come to be that in June 1940 he found himself in the first transport to the largest death camp in the world?
Halo, tu Warszawa i wszystkie rozgłośnie Polskiego Radia. Dziś rano o godzinie 5:40 oddziały niemieckie przekroczyły granicę polską.
It's September 1st, 1939. Nazi Germany attacks Poland. Despite heroic resistance, the Poles stand no chance. Sinister swastika flags are already waving over Zakopane. Czech immediately gets involved in the underground resistance movement. But the Germans are already targeting people like him.
Polish intelligentsia, politicians, athletes, and journalists. The Polish elite came here in thousands in the first period of the camp's existence.
The daily life of Auschwitz prisoners consists of constant beating, hunger, disease, and slave labor. Simply death. However, Czech gets a chance, an unusual offer. He is to appear before Commandant Rudolf Hess himself. There are already 2 other German officers waiting there. Both of them were skiers before the war.
Mr. Czech, we are people from the joint ski routes home and abroad. We want to help you. We are sorry you are here. Please, will you agree to teach our young people how to ski?
What to choose? Accept a tempting offer and survive? Or refuse and wait for death? But a real champion never kneels down. This is how Czech's reaction was remembered by one of his fellow inmates.
This righteous mountaineer, severe to himself, refused and was foaming at the mouth that someone dared make such a proposal to him.
A refusal on the part of the proud Pole annoyed Commandant Hess. But so far, Czech has not faced any consequences. Instead, the German decided to make use of his artistic talents.
Bronisław Czech was one of the prisoners working in a special artist unit called the Lager Museum, where prisoners, mainly artists, painted pictures commissioned by SS men. Bronek mainly painted the Tatra mountains. The Tatra landscapes reminded the Germans of their hometown, Tyrol, Bavaria, and thanks to this, he could move to his beloved places.
The letters that prisoners were allowed to send home from time to time were a temporary remedy for homesickness. A few perfunctory German sentences controlled by camp censorship. Some of these letters were decorated with podhale motifs by Czech.
The letters were allowed to be written only in German, and that is why Bronisław Czech was helped by other prisoner, Józef Polak. Czech was a man of honor, so he wanted to show his gratitude.
Let's listen to the memories of Józef Polak.
The snuff box, made of wood, found in the camp. On the underside of the lid of the snuff box, there is a carved signature of Bronek Czech.
This small but beautiful object will soon leave Auschwitz and, far away in Italy, it will save the life of a Wehrmacht soldier. Tragically, nothing will save Bronisław Czech himself.
The art could save him because, as his campmates told, the separation from the mountains was particularly painful for Bronisław Czech. As long as he worked in the camp museum, where he could paint, he kept his health and life. When in February 1944 the Germans closed the Lager Museum and ordered the prisoners to move to another job, his health began to decline, he lost his will to live, and after a few months he died in the camp hospital.
Bronisław Czech consciously pays the highest price. He could train German skiers in the Alps, but he chooses honor and homeland. Even in the camp, he remains a real champion. His body, once beautiful and athletic, now devastated by tuberculosis, goes to the furnace to be burned. His camp friends want to say goodbye to Bronek with honors. They cover his body with flowers and, on a cart full of corpses, in silence, they take him to the crematorium. In the history of Auschwitz, such a farewell is an absolute exception. When discussing the Auschwitz crematoria, we must understand that they don't follow the same procedures as cemetery crematoria, which burn corpses with respect for human mortal remains. Instead, they are factories converted to perform the mass incineration of people. Over time, Auschwitz grows to include another huge area, Birkenau. From the spring of 1942, the camp, initially intended mainly for Poles, becomes the main location for the extermination of European Jews.
Auschwitz is really a death factory. The SS wants to murder as efficiently as possible. In this terrible production process, the burning of the corpse becomes the biggest problem.
Here are the remains of Crematorium 5 in Birkenau. It was blown up by the Germans a day before the camp's liberation. Every year, this place is visited by hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world. They are not aware that they are looking at the only original metal skeleton of a crematorium furnace that has survived to this day, a furnace in which the corpses of the murdered were burned. A furnace that reached a temperature of 1,000 degrees Celsius.
Murdering with gas is quick and cheap, but the human body burns badly because it is mostly water. Therefore, the Germans were constantly looking for ways to speed up the incineration of the corpse. This is evidenced by the emotional testimonies of the Sonderkommando prisoners, reports from the very bottom of hell.
The Germans invented a special system. They concluded that men were thinner, women had more fat, and children were softer. Therefore, men, women, and children should be burned together. That way, burning was more effective. There was an order that the child was to be placed between the man and the woman. A child was, as the Germans used to say, an addition.
The furnaces are the work of Topf und Suna from Erfurt. The company prides itself on over 60 years of experience and satisfied customers all over the world. To this day, a shocking document has survived in which engineers accurately calculate the efficiency of the furnaces in Auschwitz and Birkenau. Within 24 hours, 4,756 bodies could have been burned there.
Członkowie Sonderkommando mówili, że te liczby były nawet wyższe.
The Sonderkommando members claimed these numbers were even higher. We have to remember the assumption was that it was adult men that were incinerated. However, here in Birkenau, the crematorium furnaces were used mainly for women, children, and minors, which is why the crematoria burning capacity increased drastically. In 1943, next in Birkenau. However, when the deportation of 430,000 Jews from Hungary began a year later, even the modern furnaces turned out to be inefficient. Four pits are dug near Crematorium 5, in which the bodies of the gassed victims are burnt. To this day, the stretcher from Crematorium 5, on which a corpse would be put into a burning furnace, has survived. What was left of a man was ash and unburned bones. Let's listen to the memories of Henrik Mandelbaum.
Ashes were raked out of the furnace and heaped up alongside, and then we took wooden ramps provided with slats or with a piece of metal sheet on the underside, and so we smashed bones. The ashes were passed through 3 sieves, and each of them had a different mesh size. Those sieves consisted of a wooden frame over which a metal mesh was spread. So prepared, the ashes were taken away by a truck and dumped into the Vistula River.
The Auschwitz death factory produced many tons of human ashes, which were dumped into the Vistula River. People were not only murdered, every trace of their existence was obliterated. It was stripped of the right to bury, say goodbye, to remember, to everything.
The history of Auschwitz teaches us that even a small object is of colossal importance. Let's return to the extraordinary story of the snuff box that Józef Polak received in the camp from Bronislaw Czech.
Józef Polak came from Silesia, from the area of the Polish-German borderline. Stories of Silesian families were often tragic. Józef Polak was deported to Auschwitz, and his brother Jan was forced to join Wehrmacht. Before he was sent to the front line, he had demanded to meet his brother. What's more, in the concentration camp.
It was a dramatic, emotional conversation. Jan Polak in a Wehrmacht uniform opposite Józef Polak in his striped uniform. Józef wanted to leave his brother a farewell souvenir, but as a prisoner he had nothing in the camp, nothing but a snuff box carved by Bronek Czech. Let's listen to the extraordinary story of the Wehrmacht soldier. The Battle of Monte Cassino, one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. The Germans put up a fierce defense in the Italian mountains. The Americans and the British, New Zealanders, and Nepalese Gurkhas are losing men in hopeless attacks.
At last, in May 1944, Polish soldiers fighting arm to arm with their Western allies took the Monte Cassino monastery. After the battle, thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers were taken into captivity. Among them, Jan Polak. He might have expected the worst. How could he prove that he wasn't a traitor and that he was forced to join Wehrmacht?
Let's listen to his brother's memories.
He encountered Polish soldiers who had no time to waste with captives. The soldiers who were interrogating him, at least 2 of them, came from Zakopane. Upon seeing the snuff box shown by the brother, they believed he was Polish, forced to serve in Wehrmacht, who had his brother in the extermination camp in Auschwitz, from whom he had just received a snuff box made by Bronek Czech. The brother was released, joined the Polish army, and participated in the war in the West until the end of World War II. He succeeded in returning home with the snuff box.
It all started with a beautiful gesture. Ski champion Bronislaw Czech wanted to thank his camp friend for helping him write letters to his family. He himself lost his life in Auschwitz, but saved another man's life, remaining a true champion until the end. In the grounds of Birkenau, thousands of items have survived. Every year, mainly during conservation and archaeological works, the museum's employees discover the anonymous traces of the lives of their murdered owners.
Hundreds or even thousands of small findings are taken to the collection. It is hard to qualify them. We treat them as silent witnesses, as evidence of a crime. They tell stories of whole families who arrived at Auschwitz in transports, hoping for a better fate, change of their residence, and taking all their belongings like pots, clothes, and suitcases. Everything they managed to take in a hurry. But first of all, everything that might have been useful.
Cups, pots, spoons, to have something to eat. Medicines, because it's a matter of survival. But the rusty keys that we find to this day make the biggest impression on me. It is shocking proof of the face of Jewish families that the difficult time will pass and that they will happily return to their homes one day. Keys to beloved houses were ordered by the Germans to be thrown away as worthless and useless. And today, we find these keys and secure them as the most valuable relics.
We can gain various information. For example, where these items came from. They are labeled with the names of manufacturing companies.
There are times when the conservator's efforts are rewarded and create memories that last for a lifetime.
Once a sheet of math test was found in a child's shoe. The teachers made corrections to it. Emotions, when a test of a murdered child is held in your hand, are impossible to describe in words. This also shows the deepest sense of the work of conservators, historians, and specialists from museum collections. Because it is not only about historical items, it's about people who were brutally murdered. Each object is a trace of a life that has been brutally and senselessly annihilated.
But Auschwitz was not only a concentration and extermination camp. It was so much more than that. It was an idea of a comfortable life for German settlers in the East, a model German city of the future. Stammlager, the main camp of Auschwitz I, was established in the spring of 1940, primarily for Polish political prisoners.
The authorities of SS wanted to use the former military barracks located on the area of Oświęcim town called Zasole.
However, in September 1941, the idea of building a second camp was born. It was supposed to be located in the displaced village of Brzezinka. The architects and planners go to work with enthusiasm. Auschwitz II-Birkenau is established. a gigantic new camp located about 2 kilometers from Stammlager. Initially, it is planned for thousands of Soviet prisoners of war, but the SS changes priorities. It's January 20th, 1942. At a conference in a villa in Wannsee near Berlin, Nazi dignitaries decide on the so-called final solution of the Jewish question. The Holocaust enters its most horrific phase. A protocol of how many Jews from a given country should be murdered has survived. In total, 11 million children, women, and men. That is why Auschwitz II-Birkenau must combine 2 functions, a gigantic concentration camp and an extermination camp with gas chambers.
What we can see here is a plan which was created a bit later, in 1943. And we can see this part of the camp as it was supposed to look in all its glory. The gas chambers and crematoria are marked, also the 4 which were built in Birkenau. And we can see how vast this space was, the amount of barracks which already then were supposed to accommodate women, political prisoners, Jewish prisoners, and of course Romani prisoners.
In its ambitious plans, the SS does not forget about the main camp. The model made by prisoners is an extraordinary piece of evidence.
It was already in 1941 when some prisoners who had certain skills, artists, sculptors, they were employed by the camp authorities to prepare a series of models which should illustrate the development of the Auschwitz concentration camp, including the new part of Auschwitz, 50 brick blocks altogether, and huge roll call square for about 30,000 prisoners. Then a sector which would include living quarters for non-commissioned officers, officers for high-ranking SS leaders who had to visit Auschwitz in the future.
Of course, the SS crew was also provided with adequate comfort of living.
Outside the main complex, there were 2 settlements for SS soldiers who were to live here together with their wives and children. So that was the final vision of Auschwitz, something like a model Nazi camp. It was a dream of the commander, Rudolf Höss, and his engineers from the construction office, namely Karl Bischoff and others.
A group of architects and engineers involved in the expansion of the camp and the reconstruction of the city of Auschwitz poses for this photo from 1943. The aim was to create an ideal place for the upbringing of the next generations of German children. Aryan paradise on earth, in the shadow of the crematorium chimneys.
A new mayor of Auschwitz hired a German architect whose task was to prepare a plan for the future redevelopment of the city. Auschwitz, at least the part of the city, represented Polish or Jewish spirit, and these buildings, this part of the city, were to be demolished completely and replaced with new Germanic buildings, with flats, apartments for German settlers. Each of them should have approximately between 70 up to 90 square meters per family.
And what really happened to the owners and residents of these houses? Poles were brutally driven out and used as cheap labor. Auschwitz Jews, who made up half of the town's population before the war, were displaced. Then they returned to their hometown once again. This time, not to their homes, but to be exterminated in the Birkenau chambers. Defeats at the front torpedoed German plans. Auschwitz did not become a model German city. The SS men did not make it in time with the last phase of the Birkenau camp, called Mexico by the prisoners.
On this section, the construction carried till the second half of 1944, but they were not finished. The Nazis wanted to complete this part of the camp despite the situation on the front, despite the approaching the Red Army from the east. And this plan presented us the scale of this madness.
Over half of the initial German plan to murder 11 million European Jews was realized. They murdered 6 million children, men and women. Over 1 million of them in Auschwitz-Birkenau alone. Had it not been for the defeat of the Third Reich, the death factory would have increased its efficiency even more.
$730, Krivko Paweł. $735, Ziemcow Iwan. $740, Karapita Pantelej. $745, Kowal Wasilij. $750, Czernikow Iwan. 8, Nagodny Wiktor.
Totenbuch, in literal translation, means a book of the dead. A book recording the deaths of Soviet prisoners of war kept by orderlies in the camp hospital.
While looking through the book, we pay attention to two facts. First, those time intervals indicating the hour of death. Other deaths were recorded at regular 5-10 minute intervals. The Book of the Dead covers a period of less than 5 months. In total, 8,320 deaths of captives were registered.
This means that during that period, an average of 58 Soviet prisoners of war died per day. The cause? On 22 June 1941, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Hundreds of thousands of Red Army soldiers were captured. They were treated by the Germans with exceptional brutality, like subhumans, worse than animals. The Germans also took revenge for the Soviets' fierce resistance on the Eastern Front. Witold Pilecki, a Polish prisoner, founder of the resistance in Auschwitz, recalled one of the methods favored by the SS for murdering the Soviets.
The captives were kept standing, sometimes in underclothes, sometimes nude, in the freezing cold, mainly in the morning or in the evening. Germans were laughing then that people from Siberia shouldn't be afraid of the cold. We heard the wailing of people freezing to death.
Particularly tragic and meaningful is the fact that those were very young men, aged 20-35.
Before the scrupulous Germans began to record their deaths in the Book of Death, a group of about 300 Soviet prisoners of war served as guinea pigs. Let's listen to the memories of one of the prisoners.
About 11 p.m., we could hear the screams of people and barking of dogs arriving from the camp. Soon, our eyes saw several hundred figures of uniformed men in greatcoats. Cries of "Don't torture, kill," uttered in Russian language, made us realize that the people being driven were Russians.
The Soviet captives, as well as the sick from the camp hospital, were locked in the basement of Block 11. All the openings in the chamber had been clogged to prevent the fresh air flow. And then the Cyclone B was poured. It was September 1941, the first documented attempt to use this gas for mass extermination.
In total, about 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war were deported to Auschwitz. At the last roll call in Auschwitz in January 1945, only 96 of them stood in even ranks. Another extraordinary story also begins in this drawing by a former prisoner. The famous camp orchestra plays at the Arbeit macht frei gate. Why was its conductor, Franz Nerechlo, ashamed to visit Auschwitz after the war? This is Franz Nerechlo's baton. It was this baton, kept to this day in the museum collections, that the prisoners of the Auschwitz Konzentrationslager Orchestra watched with fear. Fully concentrated. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes, not a single false note. They played, among others, this gladiatorial march to work units leaving and coming back from work. Here is Witold Pilecki's report.
Under the sounds of lively marching, the figures of prisoners, dead on their feet and exhausted with work, were coming back. The rows did their best to walk in step, dragging the dead bodies of their fellows, usually with their bellies on the ground. Columns of limitless physical human poverty, girded by a ring of beaters, and making people march to the beat of a cheerful melody.
The camp orchestra, why it was created? It was not a new invention, since orchestras were also in other camps and were first assigned representative functions. It was just appropriate in case of visits by high-ranking SS officials or officers.
Prisoners also mentioned concerts organized every Sunday, usually in the afternoon, for SS men, their families. SS men gathered then nearby the camp commander's villa.
Why did the orchestra play fast marches? to set the pace for the marching commandos, that is, the work groups, so that the prisoners do not waste a single second. Then they would go faster and perform slave murderous work for the Third Reich.
When the last marching prisoners passed through the gate, on the word "Aus," it was necessary to stop playing at once. Even if the music was incomplete.
This half-bar cut to the music was for the musicians, prisoners playing in an orchestra, a painful humiliation. It was a sign that this wasn't about music, but it was for tormenting people to death. One of the prisoners said the "Aus" scream was to him like a whip in the face.
Let's listen to the memories of one of the musicians.
It happened once that the trumpeters got distracted and kept playing for half a bar. The conductor, Franz Nierychło, put down his baton and approached the trumpeters. One of them took off his glasses and was immediately ready to take a hit.
Franz Nierychło, a prisoner functionary. A kitchen capo, a mediocre musician who became a camp bandmaster. His baton has recently undergone a detailed study. It turned out that the handle was made of the bones of a prehistoric cave bear. What is more, traces of human DNA were found on the baton. Does that mean that Nierychło used it to beat the prisoners?
He came from Silesia, but he spoke neither Polish nor German well. He is recorded in the prisoners' stories as an ambiguous character.
Apparently, he was very careful about the quality of how the songs were performed, both during concerts and rehearsals. Through beatings, he enforced the prisoners' obedience. Let's listen to the memories of one of the musicians.
We were practicing a Hungarian rhapsody. The time had come, and nothing. My hands were freezing cold, and my fingers were rigid. Franz was slowly approaching me. I fell down immediately. "Won't you play, you son of a bitch?" he asked.
It's amazing that the same prisoner giving his testimony within seconds later added that Nierychło in the camp did a lot of good for the prisoners. There are also reports that he was capable of driving prisoners away from the camp kitchen by kicking and beating them. However, it has not been confirmed, and there are not any prisoners' accounts that he was using a baton to do that. It's true, many prisoners, thanks to the orchestra, managed to survive. These two storylines intertwine and contradict each other. Once, Nierychło is a dull sadist. Another time, a man who saves from death.
Perhaps it will never be possible to establish where the traces of human DNA found on Franz Nierychło's baton came from. After all, almost 80 years have passed since the war. That doesn't change the fact that this baton has witnessed the suffering of many talented musicians. The figure of Franz Nierychło is a mystery. In 1944, he volunteered to join the Wehrmacht. As he was leaving the camp, a crowd of prisoners bade the traitor and brute conductor farewell with howls and whistles. After the war, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, let's repeat this fact. There were those who were grateful to him for saving their life.
Let us approach it with humility, because there were more such controversial figures as Franz Nierychło. Behind the description Arbeit macht frei, another word began. The word of violence and total dehumanization were beating with a baton killed or saved lives. We cannot judge this other word with our eyes or concepts.